My dead husband's number rang during the will meeting. We were in a conference room that smelled of toner and expensive paper, the mahogany table cold beneath my fingertips. Mr. Patterson droned through Article 2 when a sharp buzz skated across the wood. Across from me, Sarah's phone lit up beside her manicured hand. Richard. My Richard's smiling photo, blue tie, our anniversary dinner, filled her screen. For a half second, the name at the top read exactly what it shouldn't have. Richard Chen. Sarah's fingers snapped down. Too late. Mr. Patterson stopped. The room went quiet enough that I could hear the air vent and the faint whir of his printer behind him. Mrs. Chen, he said carefully, eyes still on Sarah's phone. Was that your husband's contact? Sarah forced a laugh. Spam. They spoof numbers now. It's nothing. But I knew that number. I had dialed it 1,000 times. Before March and after March, when I stood over his casket and tried to memorize the last weight of his hand. Mr. Patterson didn't argue. He simply made a note on his yellow legal pad, slow, deliberate strokes, then slid his reading glasses back up his nose. He returned to the will as if nothing had happened. And I sat there, listening to my husband's life being reduced to paragraphs while the impossible buzz kept echoing in my bones. That call log had one line that shouldn't exist. But let me start from the beginning. 3 months earlier, on a Tuesday morning in March, Richard collapsed in our kitchen. The kettle was just beginning to whistle. I remember because the sound kept going, thin and desperate, even after he hit the tile. 1 second he was reaching for his coffee mug, the next his knees folded as if someone had cut the strings. My fingers dialed 911 first. The dispatcher stayed in my ear. Ma'am, is he breathing? Ma'am, stay with me. While my other hand trembled over the contacts list on my phone. And I called Sarah. Not my sister, not my neighbor, my daughter-in-law. Sarah worked at the hospital. She always sounded competent in a crisis. And in those first panicked seconds, I trusted her the way you trust someone who has always seemed capable. That trust cost me everything. Richard died that afternoon. The doctor said the words gently. We did everything we could, but the sentence landed like a door closing. By evening, people were already asking me questions I couldn't answer. Where the papers were, what he wanted, whether he had updated anything. At the funeral, I moved through the receiving line like a person underwater. Hands squeezed mine. Casseroles appeared on my porch. Sympathy cards stacked up on the side table, still unopened because I couldn't bear to see his name in other people's handwriting. Sarah stepped in with the kind of efficiency grief makes you grateful for. Mom, I'll handle it, she said, taking my phone before I even realized I'd handed it to her. Insurance, credit cards, all the little accounts. You don't need to be doing this right now. I watched her make calls in my kitchen, voice soft and sure. She canceled subscriptions that kept charging a dead man for magazines he'd never read again. She spoke to representatives like she was doing them a favor, like she belonged in those conversations. Mom, you don't need to worry about any of this, she told me one night, placing a cup of tea in front of me, as if tea could fix a shattered life. Let me take care of the paperwork. You just focus on healing. If you've ever felt like your grief was being used against you, like your sorrow was being treated as a weakness someone could manage, then you already know the kind of relief that sentence can bring. Within a week, Sarah knew things I had never memorized because I had never needed to. Richard's social security number, his mother's maiden name, the name of the dog he'd had before we met. Those security answers banks love to ask when they're deciding whether you deserve access to your own life. She was good with systems, portals, passwords, verification codes. She'd sit at my kitchen counter with Richard's old laptop open, my mail spread out like evidence, her phone in one hand and a pen in the other. She moved through his accounts with a competence that should have impressed me. Instead, it soothed me. I thought she was protecting me from decisions. The first sign came in April. I tried to log into our joint savings account one morning because I wanted to see the balance with my own eyes. The password didn't work. I tried again, slower, as if careful typing could bring order back. Still nothing. When I called the bank, the hold music played long enough for the sun to shift on the kitchen floor. A representative finally returned with a tone that was suddenly formal. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen," she said, "but we show account management has been updated. A durable power of attorney is on file. Sarah Chen is listed as your agent." "What power of attorney?" The words came out sharper than I intended. I never. "The documents were submitted last week," she continued, as if she were reading from a script. "For your protection, we can't discuss account details without your agent's verification." My agent. I hung up and sat at the table, staring at the receiver like it had betrayed me. I tried to remember signing anything like that. The days after the funeral had been a blur of handshakes and casseroles and papers pushed in front of me, while people murmured about taking care of details. Sarah had been there for all of it, guiding my elbow, whispering where to sign, where to initial, when to rest. At the time, I'd been grateful not to think. Now I started replaying those moments the way you replay a fall, looking for the second your footing went wrong. Within 2 weeks, my mail began to thin out. Not everything, just the important pieces. Bank statements, insurance correspondence, anything that still had Richard's name printed in bold, like the world hadn't gotten the news. It felt like those envelopes evaporated between the mailbox and my kitchen counter. When I mentioned it, Sarah nodded sympathetically, her face arranged into concern. "I've been collecting those for you," she said. "They're all organized at our house in folders. Don't worry about any of it right now. Don't worry, focus on healing." Those phrases became a soft blanket wrapped around a hard cage. When I tried to call the bank again a few days later, I was transferred twice, first to estate services, then to a specialist. Each time, I was asked more questions than I'd ever been asked in 47 years of marriage. Date of birth, last 4 digits, security phrase, address history, then the same sentence again. "We need your agent's verification." My own bank started asking her permission. By early May, the cage reached into my family. David called on a Thursday evening, his voice careful in that way adult children use when they're about to deliver something they believe is merciful. "Mom, Sarah's been telling me some bills are piling up," he began. "Maybe it's time to get help managing things." "What kind of help?" I asked, already hearing the shape of it. In the background, I caught the faint murmur of Sarah's voice, low, steady, feeding him lines. My son, who I'd taught to balance a checkbook at 16, was now questioning whether I could recognize my own name on a statement. "David," I said, keeping my voice level because I refused to sound like the stereotype she was building. I handled our finances for 47 years. "I know, Mom," he said, and the word "but" came right after it like a blade. "But this is different. Sarah says the accounts are complicated, and with Dad's estate." "Sarah says," I let the words hang in the air between us. "When did Sarah become the expert on what I can and can't handle?" He didn't answer right away. Silence crackled through the line, and in that silence I heard something else, agreement. Not with me, with her. Finally, he exhaled. "She's just trying to help. She thinks you're overwhelmed." Overwhelmed, as if grief were a diagnosis, as if losing the person you built a life with automatically meant losing your competence. In the span of 3 months, my daughter-in-law had positioned herself as my protector while quietly lowering my credibility in the eyes of the people who should have known me best. Even my son was reading from her script. And I told myself I could fix it once I got my footing again. Once the fog lifted, once the casseroles stopped coming, once my hands stopped shaking when I saw Richard's name. I didn't understand yet that the fog was useful to her. It wasn't just the money, it was the permission she was teaching everyone to ask from her. The probate meeting that brought us to that conference room didn't happen by accident. Sarah orchestrated every detail, timing, seating, and the neat stacks of documents I'd never seen before. 2 weeks earlier, she called me with the tone she used when delivering news disguised as care. "Mom, I've been talking with Mr. Patterson's office, and we really need to move forward with the estate settlement. There are time-sensitive issues that can't wait much longer." "What kind of issues?" "Tax implications mostly. And some of Dad's accounts have been flagged for review because they haven't been properly transferred yet." By then, I'd learned to translate Sarah's language. Time-sensitive meant she wanted something done quickly. Complicated meant she wanted me to stop asking questions. "Can I talk to Mr. Patterson directly?" "Of course," she said smoothly, "but he's swamped. Let's schedule one meeting where everyone's together. We'll finalize everything at once." That same week, something else happened. Quiet, almost easy to miss, which is how Sarah liked things. My sister Linda couldn't reach me directly anymore. She'd called every Sunday for years. Then suddenly, her calls went straight to a message system. When I finally called her back, she sounded both worried and irritated. "Helen, I've been trying for weeks. It never rings." That night, I opened my voicemail and found messages I'd never been notified about. 17 of them, dated and time-stamped like breadcrumbs, in a hallway I didn't know existed. A few were from Linda, one was from the bank, another from a pharmacy. The newest sat at the top like a fresh bruise. When I mentioned it to Sarah, she didn't look surprised. She looked pleased, like she'd solved a problem before I even knew it was mine. "Oh," she said, waving a hand as if it were dust. "I turned on a call forwarding filter. You don't need solicitors and stress while you're grieving." I didn't remember asking for a filter. I didn't remember authorizing anything that could decide who got to reach me. But Sarah kept using the same word, fragile, as if it were a legal category. The meeting she scheduled was Tuesday morning, early enough that I'd be tired, late enough that lunch would be looming. She offered to bring everything we needed, which I should have declined. When I arrived at the law office, the air smelled like copier toner and stale coffee. Sarah was already seated, file folders arranged in neat stacks. She placed herself at the head of the table, with Mr. Patterson to her right and my chair to her left, close enough that she could slide papers under my hand without standing up. "Mom," she said brightly, "I've already reviewed most of these with Mr. Patterson, so we should get through everything quickly." Mr. Patterson looked up, blinking as if he'd just realized what he was seeing. "Actually, Mrs. Chen, most of these documents came from Sarah's files, not our office. I haven't had a chance to review them thoroughly." Sarah's smile didn't move. "Right. These are things Richard kept at home. Mom hasn't been up to organizing, so I've been helping collect the estate documents." But I had been organizing. I'd spent weeks going through Richard's desk, his file cabinet, the little fireproof box he insisted on keeping behind the winter coats. The papers she spread across that table didn't match his careful record-keeping. "Where exactly did you find these?" I asked. "His home office, mostly," Sarah said. "And a few things from the bank safe deposit box you gave me access to." I had never given her access to our safe deposit box. The realization hit like cold water. I looked at Mr. Patterson. His pen had stopped moving across his yellow legal pad. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I don't recall authorizing that." "Mom, remember when we went to the bank after the funeral?" She leaned in, gentle as a nurse. "You signed forms so I could help with transfers. The safe deposit access was part of that. I remembered signing papers, yes, but I remembered signing them with a head full of fog, while she pointed and whispered, "Right there, just initial here, Mr." Patterson cleared his throat. Perhaps we should start by reviewing what documents we're working with today. Sarah's helpful expression flickered, just once. That would take forever, and honestly, we're already running up against tight deadlines. Some filings are time-limited. She opened the first folder and began pulling out documents I'd never seen before. A revised will dated 6 months before Richard's death, an amendment to our living trust changing the successor trustee from me to her, a power of attorney document supposedly signed during Richard's final hospital stay. "I don't remember him signing any of these," I said. "Mom," Sarah replied softly, "he was heavily medicated. The doctors said it was important to update legal paperwork while he was still lucid." Mr. Patterson studied the pages with that careful stillness lawyers use when they don't want to alarm anyone too quickly. He asked about witnesses, about notarization. Sarah answered smoothly, sprinkling in just enough legal terminology to sound legitimate. Then I saw what the revised will did. It cut my inheritance from our joint assets by nearly 60%. The trust amendment placed Sarah in control of the family home and investment accounts, things Richard and I had built over decades. "Sarah," I said, and it took effort not to let my voice crack, "these papers would change everything we planned." "Dad wanted you protected," she said, turning my life into a sentence that fit on a sticky note. "He was worried about you managing everything alone as you get older." Richard had never worried about my competence. The idea that he'd secretly signed away my control felt like a betrayal that reached past death. Sarah kept pressing. "The probate court requires certain filings," she said, "and there are distribution schedules. If we wait, it gets expensive." "How much time are we talking about?" I asked. "Ideally?" She didn't hesitate. 2 weeks. I know that sounds fast, but the longer we wait, the more it costs. 2 weeks to restructure an estate we'd spent decades building. 2 weeks to sign away control over assets I had helped earn. I looked around that table and realized the trap Sarah had built. If I signed, I surrendered my life in ink. If I refused, I became the difficult widow, too emotional to cooperate with proper administration. Mr. Patterson kept taking notes. Sarah kept smiling. And then she delivered the line that was meant to seal it. She said delays would cost thousands in fees. I didn't sign anything that day. Despite the deadline pressure, despite Sarah's gentle insistence that delays would cost me thousands, I walked out of that conference room with every document still unsigned. Sarah's smile tightened when I told her I needed time to review everything at home. "Mom, I really think we should wrap this up today. These deadlines aren't flexible." "Then they'll have to wait," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I need to understand what I'm signing." That afternoon, alone in my kitchen with Richard's coffee mug still sitting in the dish rack, I spread out everything I could find from our 47 years together. Old bank statements, insurance policies, the original will we'd signed years ago, and stored the way Richard always stored important things, flat, labeled, and exact. None of it matched what Sarah had presented. The will she'd slid across Mr. Patterson's table was dated October 15th of last year, 6 months before Richard died. But I found our real will, dated years earlier, in a folder Richard had marked, in his blocky handwriting, "Estate, do not move." Richard's signature looked different on Sarah's version, looser. Wrong in the way a copied key is wrong. You can feel the shape is close, but the teeth don't catch the lock. The trust amendment was even worse. According to Sarah's document, Richard had replaced me as successor trustee in November, 4 months before his death, but our original trust was clear. The surviving spouse maintained control unless incapacitated. Numbers didn't match what I remembered. I pulled out our most recent investment statements. Richard's 401k balance was $847,000 as of December 31st. The statement Sarah had shown claimed $923,000, a difference of more than $70,000. Either someone had been moving money without my knowledge, or the statement itself had been manufactured. I spent hours comparing signatures, checking dates, cross-referencing account numbers. Some discrepancies were subtle, 1 digit off in an account number, a different formatting on letterhead. Others were blatant, dates that collided with hospital records, signatures that didn't match Richard's hand. Richard had been hospitalized for weeks before he died. Sarah claimed he signed revised estate documents during that window, but I had copies of his medical chart. During that period, he was heavily sedated after the stroke. The doctors had been clear. He wasn't capable of making complex decisions. Yet according to Sarah's paperwork, he had somehow restructured everything while he could barely keep his eyes open. By evening, I knew I needed help. Real legal help from someone who hadn't been fed Sarah's version first. The next morning, I called Mitchell and Associates, the firm that had handled our original estate planning, not Mr. Patterson, our longtime attorney, James Mitchell, who had known Richard and me for more than 20 years. "Mrs. Chen, I'm so sorry for your loss," he said. "Richard was a good man. How can I help you?" His voice held the kind of sympathy that didn't feel performative. When I explained what happened at the probate meeting, the silence stretched long enough that I checked the phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Helen," he said finally, "I need to ask you some specific questions. Did Richard ever mention revising your estate plan in the months before his death?" "Never." "Did he ever express concerns about your ability to manage finances?" "The opposite. He always said I was better with the books than he was." "Did you ever authorize anyone to access your safe deposit box?" "Absolutely not." Another pause, different now, heavier. "Helen," he said, and the warmth in his voice sharpened into caution, "I think we need to meet, today. Can you come to my office?" 2 hours later, I sat across from him while he reviewed photocopies of Sarah's documents. His expression darkened with each page. "These signatures don't look right," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Richard's handwriting changed after his stroke, but not like this. And some of these dates—" He tapped the page once. "Helen, he wasn't even coherent during this period." "So these documents are fake?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "I can't call it conclusively without a handwriting expert and forensic document analysis," he said. "But I can tell you this, none of these revisions came through our office, and we've been your estate planning attorneys for 2 decades. My lawyer said he'd never sent those forms." James opened a file cabinet and pulled out our real estate documents. The contrast felt almost obscene. Our real will left everything to me, with David as secondary beneficiary. Our real trust named me as successor trustee with full authority. Any power of attorney tied to Richard ended when Richard did. Sarah's versions redistributed assets, handed her control, and extended authority that shouldn't have existed. "What do I do?" I asked. "First, we document everything," he said. "I want copies of every paper Sarah gave you, every statement you can find, every medical record from Richard's final hospitalization. Second, we request certified copies of anything filed with probate court. Third, we contact your bank and investment companies to verify account activity and access history." "Is this legal, what I'm doing?" "Helen," he said, steady and certain, "you're protecting your own assets and investigating potential fraud. Not only is it legal, it's necessary." For the first time in 3 months, someone was taking my concerns seriously. James didn't treat my suspicions like grief-induced confusion. He treated them like what they were, inconsistencies that deserved a paper trail. "How long will this take?" I asked. "Some parts take weeks," he said, "but we can move quickly on protection, requests, holds, and court filings if needed. The most important thing is that you didn't sign anything." "What if Sarah pressures me again?" "You refer her to me," he said. "From now on, all estate communications go through my office. And if anyone asks you to sign anything related to Richard's estate, you call me first." I left his office with a plan and something I hadn't felt since Richard died: clarity. That evening, I started a notebook. Every call from Sarah, every visit, every deadline, every document. Writing it down made the pattern impossible to unsee. And when I read James's last note from our meeting, the next step was blunt, simple, and terrifying. He said we'd need proof of tampering. The phone carrier investigation started with a simple request that led to revelations I never could have imagined. James Mitchell gave me a 2-page checklist, single-spaced and blunt, in the way good legal work often was. At the top he wrote, "Communications first." Under it, phone records plus carrier change logs plus voicemail access. I told him about the call forwarding issue, the 17 voicemails from my sister that had vanished into a place I didn't know existed. "We need to document exactly how your communications were being managed," he said. "Phone companies keep detailed records of account changes. If someone manipulated your service without authorization, there will be a digital trail. And if a trail exists, it tends to connect to everything else." The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone on speaker. Richard's coffee mug sat beside my notebook like a witness. My hands still trembled, small, humiliating shakes that Sarah would have called fragility. I hated that word now. It was too useful in someone else's mouth. I expected an endless loop of automated menus. Instead, when I said, "unauthorized account changes," the call clicked through to a calm voice. "Verizon Fraud Prevention, this is Dana. Can I confirm the primary account holder's name?" "Helen Chen," I said. Dana verified my account. Last 4 digits of my social billing zip code. Account PIN. I answered slowly, carefully, the way James taught me. No guessing, no rushing, no, "I think." Then I heard her exhale. "Mrs. Chen, I'm seeing unusual activity on your account. Over the past few months, authorized user additions, call forwarding modifications, voicemail PIN changes. Did you authorize these?" "No," I said. "I didn't." "All right," she replied, and her tone shifted into something procedural, as if she'd stepped from customer service into evidence. "I'm going to read you what the system shows. Please stop me if anything sounds familiar." She began listing entries like a timeline of my life being edited without my consent. "March 18th, 9:42 a.m., an authorized user was added to your account. Sarah Chen, relationship, family, verification account PIN. March 18th, 3 days after the funeral, the day my house was still full of people eating casseroles and telling me to drink water. The day Sarah walked around my kitchen with my phone in her hand, saying, "I'll handle it, Mom," while I stared at a stack of sympathy cards I couldn't open. Dana continued. "March 22nd, 9:14 a.m., account change, call forwarding, CFWD, activated, Richard Chenline, Sarah Chen device, ending in -8,841. For a second, I didn't understand the words. Then my stomach dropped hard, like I'd missed a step on the stairs. Richard's line, forwarded, to her. Dana paused, as if giving my brain time to catch up. "There are additional sub-entries the same day," she said. "Selective forwarding rules created after activation. For example, calls from Linda Chen forwarded. Calls from First National's mainline forwarded. Multiple numbers added over the following weeks." My throat tightened. Linda, my sister. The Sunday calls that had always anchored my week. Dana went on. April 3rd, 2:06 p.m. Voicemail pin changed. April 15th, 11:33 a.m. Forwarding rules updated. Added investment services. Added insurance claims. Then she said something that felt worse than all of it. I'm also seeing multiple voicemail access events after these changes. Remote retrieval activity that doesn't match your device signature. What does that mean? I asked, even though I already knew what it meant. It means someone was checking your voicemail from another device, she said carefully, not just forwarding calls, accessing messages. I gripped my pen so hard my knuckles ached. I had thought I was missing calls. I hadn't understood I was missing information. The kind of information banks used to verify you. The kind doctors left when they couldn't reach you. The kind family left when they were worried. I didn't authorize any of that, I said again. I believe you, Dana replied, and it didn't sound like a slogan. The system shows the changes were initiated under Sarah Chen's authorization after she was added as an account manager. When was she added again? I forced myself to ask. Oh, March 18th, and the request originated from your registered number. I remembered that day too clearly. Sarah had used my phone to help. At one point she asked lightly, "What's your PIN again?" And I said it without thinking, because grief makes you hand over things you don't even realize you're holding. Apparently, she'd been holding more than my phone. Can you remove her authorization immediately? I asked. Yes, Dana said. I can remove her as an authorized user, disable call forwarding, reset voicemail credentials, and place a fraud flag on the account so no changes can be made without in-person verification. In person, I repeated, tasting the safety of the word. We can also provide detailed logs, she added. Account activity, forwarding history, voicemail access records. We'll generate a fraud case number. She read it slowly. VZFR1-18204. I wrote it down in my notebook, the ink pressing deep into the paper. Then I made her repeat it, because I wasn't letting a single digit slip away. Dana told me one more thing before we ended the call, like she knew I needed to hear it. Mrs. Chen, every forwarding rule has timestamps and IPs attached. We can tell where changes were initiated. It's not guesswork. I swallowed. Every forwarding rule had timestamps and IPs. When I hung up, I didn't sit and cry. I didn't have the energy for release anymore. I called James because that was what we did now, procedure instead of panic. Helen, he said, brisk and grounded, tell me what they gave you. I read him the dates and the fraud case number. I told him the line that made my stomach drop. The call forwarding activation on Richard's number, routed to Sarah's device. He went quiet for a beat. Then he said, "Good. That's evidence. That's preservable. We'll request certified logs. We'll include the carrier activity report in the packet." He didn't call Sarah names. He didn't talk about vengeance. He talked about packets, certified records, and chain of custody, like a man building a bridge out of paper. This isn't a family misunderstanding, he added. This is potential telecommunications fraud. We document it, we preserve it, and we obtain everything properly. The bank records revealed an even more disturbing pattern. James arranged a meeting with First National's security department. Walking into that branch felt like stepping into a familiar room where someone had quietly moved the furniture. The marble floors were the same, the teller windows were the same, but I noticed security cameras now, the way I hadn't before. I noticed how the manager's office door could close and lock. Mrs. Rodriguez greeted me with a tight smile, professional, controlled, the expression of someone who was trying not to show shock. "Mrs. Chen," she said, "thank you for coming in person. Mr. Mitchell sent your authorization. We can speak freely with you. Speak freely, another phrase that sounded like oxygen. Inside her office, she turned her monitor slightly toward me. I'm going to be honest, she said. Sarah Chen has been managing your accounts as if she had full power of attorney. Until this moment, we had no reason to question her authority because we had documentation on file. She clicked through a list of changes: password resets, mailing preferences, notification recipients. March 20th, she read. Sarah appeared at the branch with a death certificate and a power of attorney. She requested access to Richard's individual accounts and modifications to your joint accounts. And that power of attorney is disputed, I said. We believe it was forged. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded once. If it's forged, then actions taken under it are unauthorized. That's why we document every change and preserve the audit trail. She opened a tab labeled Logan Audit. This is your online banking access history, she said. Date, time, device type, IP address. She pointed to a line. April 11th, 7:48 p.m. login from an IP address that doesn't match your home network. It traces to a residential internet account across town. My skin went cold. It wasn't just paper manipulation. Someone had been inside my accounts, repeatedly, without me. She scrolled. April 13th, 6:22 a.m. Another login. Same IP block. April 16th, April 19th. It's consistent. Can you tell whose house? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. We can't identify a subscriber name from the bank side, she said, but we can preserve the log and provide it to law enforcement if requested, and we can lock your profile so no changes can be made without in-person ID. She opened another section. Statement delivery preferences, she said. Several were changed to electronic only. Alerts were routed to an email address that isn't yours. That's not my email, I said, staring at the screen like it might confess. No, she replied. It was added on April 9th at 10:12 a.m. after a successful login. Then she pulled up the safe deposit box file. Access was requested on March 27th, she said. There's a signature card. Can I see it? She printed it. The printer hummed behind her desk and spit out a page that felt warm when I picked it up. The signature looked like mine in the way counterfeit money looks real from across the room. Up close, it wasn't right. The loop of the H was too sharp. The pressure was wrong, like someone had pressed carefully instead of naturally. I stared at it until the words came out on their own. She'd been signing my name for weeks. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't argue. She didn't try to soften it. She simply nodded, as if she'd been waiting for me to see what she saw. We can freeze everything now, she said. Revoke all third-party access. Reverse statement preferences. Reissue credentials. And provide a complete packet, transaction histories, change logs, login audits, and copies of any documents presented to us. How much money? I asked, because my mind demanded a number, even though my body didn't want one. She hesitated. Based on redirected transfers and the modifications, there's significant exposure, potentially hundreds of thousands. The exact number will depend on what we can trace and recover. For months, Sarah had made me feel confused. She had made David feel concerned. She had made the bank feel reassured. And all the while, she had been inside my accounts like she lived there. Mrs. Rodriguez slid a thick folder toward me, printed summaries of suspicious changes, access logs, and a timeline of modifications. It was heavy in a way paper shouldn't be. I left the bank with that folder hugged to my chest not because it was fragile, but because it was proof. Proof Sarah had tried to keep me from holding. Back at James Mitchell's office, his conference table disappeared under evidence. Carrier logs with timestamps, forwarding rules with activation times, bank login records with IP addresses, statement preference changes, alert recipient updates, and copies of the forged documents Sarah had pushed across Mr. Patterson's table. James didn't declare verdicts. He built files. "We're assembling an evidence packet," he said. "Carrier records, bank records, medical records, and will request certified copies of anything filed with probate. Everything obtained legally, everything preserved properly." He labeled folders with a thick marker: phone, bank, medical, probate. Then he slipped the Verizon carrier page into a clear sleeve and wrote in block letters at the top: Exhibit 3, the page he said we'd need in that probate room. I watched him staple the bank login audit to an affidavit form. I watched him write chain of custody across the top of a page, and I understood, finally, why Sarah had worked so hard to keep me too overwhelmed for details. Details were where she bled. We had enough for fraud charges. 2 weeks later, I walked back into the same conference room at Patterson and Associates. Probate case number PR 2504192 stamped on the folder Mr. Patterson set beside his legal pad, but this time everything was different. James Mitchell sat to my right, a thick evidence binder resting on the table like a weight. Mr. Patterson had requested this follow-up meeting to resolve the outstanding estate issues, and I could tell from the calm set of his mouth that he expected us to come in, sign, and leave. Sarah arrived 5 minutes after we did, her usual manila folders in hand. Her confident smile faltered when she saw James. "Mom, I didn't realize you were bringing a different attorney. I thought we were working with Mr. Patterson to finalize everything." "Mr. Mitchell handled our estate planning for 20 years, I said, keeping my voice level. I wanted him to review what I was asked to sign. Sarah recovered quickly, the helpful mask clicking back into place. "Of course, that makes perfect sense. I'm sure he'll find everything in order." She sat across from us and spread her papers out like she owned the table. The same revised will, the same trust amendment, the same power of attorney pages that claimed Richard had signed them while he was barely conscious. She still thought she controlled the narrative. James opened his binder and laid his own documents down in neat, quiet rows. Carrier logs, bank access records, forensic signature findings, and a thin stack of medical records, with the hospital's letterhead visible at the top. I recognized the clear sleeve labeled ****, Exhibit 3 ****. The Verizon page James had promised we'd need in this room. The same evidence I'd watched him file and seal, because details were where Sarah bled. I reviewed the documents provided at the last meeting, James said, professionally neutral. "I have questions about authenticity." Sarah's smile stayed fixed. Dad was thorough about updating things. James didn't argue. He simply opened the hospital file. According to these records, Richard was cognitively incapacitated during the period these documents claim to have been executed, he said. The attending physician provided a sworn statement that he was unable to make complex legal decisions from February 8th until his death. Mr. Patterson looked up sharply. Sarah's posture shifted, almost invisible, just a fraction of an inch back. "The chart doesn't capture his better days," Sarah said carefully. "There were moments when he was alert." "That's interesting," James replied, sliding a forensic report forward. "Because the certified document examiner found clear indicators of forgery. 12 distinct deviations from Richard's authenticated signature pattern." Sarah's hands moved toward her folders, as if she might sweep them up and leave. "I think there's confusion," she said, voice a shade higher. "These came from Dad's files." "Speaking of records," James said, still calm, "I'd like to ask about the unauthorized modifications to Helen's phone service and online banking access. Verizon's fraud team documented multiple forwarding changes and PIN resets initiated under your authorization." The room tightened. Mr. Patterson's pen stopped. Sarah's face paled. Mom gave me permission, Sarah said. She was grieving. She needed help. The permission you relied on is the same document we believe was forged, James said, not raising his voice. And the bank's access logs show repeated logins from an IP address not associated with Helen's home network. Sarah pushed her chair back, the scrape loud against the carpet. This is ridiculous. I've been protecting Mom from predators. If you want to nitpick paperwork, we can do this later. She reached for her phone, probably to call David, probably to turn this into a story about an ungrateful widow and an attacked daughter-in-law. And then the room gave us a gift no one could talk their way around. The phone buzzed against the polished table. Sarah's screen lit up. Richard. My husband's smiling photo, blue tie, crooked grin from our anniversary dinner, filled the glass like a ghost pressed against a window. Everyone stared at it. Sarah's hand froze halfway to the phone, her expression cycling through confusion, panic, and calculations so fast I could almost hear the gears grinding. That's interesting, James said quietly. Richard has been deceased for 4 months. How exactly is his number calling you? It's probably spam, Sarah snapped too fast. Scammers spoof numbers. Phones do weird things. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. And for the first time, he sounded less like a mediator and more like an officer of the court trying to stay in control of his own conference room. Miss Chen, he said, please don't touch the device for a moment. Sarah's eyes widened. You can't just... We're not taking your phone, James said, firm but measured. But given what's at issue here, we're going to preserve what just happened. He didn't reach for Sarah's phone again. He reached for evidence, because we'd come prepared. James slid the printed Verizon sheet from ***, Exhibit 3*** onto the table, clean, official, time-stamped, then placed it between all of us like a chess move. Print the call log from this number, he said, looking at Mr. Patterson. Mr. Patterson pressed his intercom. Claire, please come in. His paralegal appeared at the door. Claire, Mr. Patterson said, voice precise, I'm going to ask you to print the carrier call detail page from Mr. Mitchell's exhibit packet, page 3. And then, Miss Chen, I'm also going to ask that you voluntarily scroll to the recent calls on your device so the room can confirm what we're seeing. If you refuse, I will note the refusal in the file. Sarah stood rigid, breathing shallow. Claire returned with 2 pages and placed them in front of Mr. Patterson. He glanced down, then his mouth tightened. James leaned in and read silently for a moment, then turned the sheet so I could see it. It wasn't the call itself that froze my blood. It was the line beneath it. ***03/22, 9:14 a.m. Account change, call forwarding, CFWD. Activated, Richard Chen Lane, Sarah Chen device, ending in -8841. One strange line. A change made after his funeral, after the world had stopped calling him, after his body had been lowered into the ground. Sarah's throat worked. Her eyes flicked to the date, then back to the room, as if she could rewrite it by force of will. Her face went white when she saw the dates. James didn't gloat. He simply kept building the sequence, one receipt at a time. This isn't a spoofed call, he said. This is a carrier log showing deliberate forwarding activation on Richard's line, routed to Miss Chen's device, and here, he tapped another row, calls from First National's number forwarded within minutes. The pattern matches the bank's access timeline. Sarah's voice cracked. You don't understand. I was helping. She was overwhelmed. By intercepting her bank calls? Mr. Patterson asked, softly now. By presenting documents that appear to be forged? Sarah's shoulders collapsed a fraction, like something inside her finally stopped holding. It started as helping, she whispered, and then it got complicated. I watched her, and what shocked me wasn't her panic. It was how quickly the room recalibrated around the truth once it was printed in black ink with a timestamp. Mr. Patterson set down his pen. Miss Chen, based on what has been presented, I'm obligated to suspend any further action on these filings and notify the probate court of potential fraud concerns. I will also advise the court that contested documents may have been submitted. James nodded once, and will be requesting immediate protective relief, freezes and verified access, so Helen's accounts and communications can't be touched while this is investigated. Sarah looked around the room as if searching for an exit that wasn't there. The woman who had spent months convincing everyone I was too fragile to understand my own life sat small and cornered, not by anger, but by procedure. The room finally saw her for what she was. The legal consequences began within hours of that confrontation. James Mitchell had warned me that once we presented evidence of fraud to the probate court, the system would move, not dramatically, but decisively. He was right. By late afternoon, he had filed an emergency motion under probate case number PR 25-04192, attaching the carrier logs, bank access records, and the forensic signature report as exhibits. At 5:07 p.m., the clerk's office called. Mrs. Chen, the court clerk said, Judge Martinez entered an emergency protective order. The court is suspending action on disputed filings and freezing any changes made under the contested documents. Miss Sarah Chen has been removed from any fiduciary role pending investigation. The relief I felt wasn't joy. It was oxygen. For 4 months, Sarah had positioned herself as the gatekeeper to my own life, requiring her approval for decisions about my own money, my own house, my own future. Now, with a single order, that artificial authority evaporated. Within 24 hours, I received calls from First National Bank, Verizon, my investment company, and my insurance provider. Each organization spoke in the same language: security protocols, reversals, restored direct access. We've identified 17 separate instances where account permissions were changed using documents now under dispute, the bank security manager explained. All non-owner access is being terminated. We're restoring statements and alerts to your address and your device. Verizon's fraud department confirmed, in a voice that sounded almost clinical, that call forwarding had been disabled and Sarah's authorized user status removed. They told me the same thing James told me. The point wasn't revenge. The point was to stop the bleeding and preserve the trail. For the first time in months, I felt protected by the same institutions Sarah had been using like tools. She couldn't sign anything in my name anymore. The family reckoning was more complicated, but it was also more honest. David called me 2 days later. His voice sounded older than it had a week ago. "Mom, I don't know how to apologize," he said. "Sarah showed me documents. She told me you were struggling to manage everything after Dad died. I thought I was helping by backing her up." "You were trying to protect me," I said, and I meant it. Sarah is very good at making people believe what she wants them to believe. "But I should have talked to you directly," he said. "I should have questioned why you suddenly couldn't manage finances you'd handled for decades." I could hear him fighting with the shame of it, the realization that he'd been manipulated as cleanly as I had. Sarah had taken his concern and sharpened it into a weapon. "David," I said, "she spent months positioning herself as the responsible one while painting me as fragile. You saw what she wanted you to see. How did you figure it out?" "Because the numbers didn't add up," I said. "The documents didn't match our real plans. The signatures were wrong. The medical timeline didn't make sense." We talked for nearly an hour, and as we talked, the pattern became clearer. Sarah didn't just control accounts, she controlled the story. What David heard, what I heard, what the bank heard, what people believed was happening inside my home. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said again, quieter. "I'm sorry I doubted you." "You don't need to apologize for caring," I told him. "You do need to remember this. If someone insists on being the only bridge between you and me, ask why." He apologized for doubting my clarity. Sarah's consequences unfolded in the way consequences usually do, through paperwork and notices, not shouting. Within a week of the emergency order, she lost access to every account, every password reset channel, every helpful authorization she'd layered into my life. Banks flagged her profile. Verizon marked the forwarding changes as disputed fraud activity. My investment company placed a hard lock on any instructions not initiated by me in person. Her attorney contacted James with a request to discuss resolution. The letter didn't admit wrongdoing. It used phrases like misunderstanding and family conflict, as if fraud could be softened by tone. "She's trying to limit damage," James explained. "Restitution, cooperation, anything to avoid the full weight of a criminal case." "What do you think?" I asked. "I think we keep everything procedural," he said. "We cooperate with investigators, we pursue protective orders, and we restore what's yours. The evidence speaks. You don't have to." Later that week, an investigator from the district attorney's office called to confirm they were opening a formal investigation into the telecommunications and banking activity. "Mrs. Chen," she said, "we're coordinating records requests. You did the right thing by documenting everything through legitimate channels." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. And then the court's enforcement piece arrived. The part that wasn't a phone call or a promise, but a formal line in an order. The court removed her from all my accounts. 6 months after the confrontation, my life settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. I returned to routines Sarah had quietly disrupted. Morning coffee in Richard's favorite mug, the newspaper landing on my doorstep again, delivered to me, not filtered through someone else's hands. Sunday calls from my sister Linda, the kind that start with small gossip and end with the comfort of knowing you're still reachable. The simple acts of independence felt like small victories. Opening my own mail, paper rasping against my thumb as I tore an envelope, without wondering what had gone missing. Answering my own phone without hearing an echo of someone else's permission. I rebuilt my financial life the way you rebuild after a storm. Not with grand gestures, but with better anchors. A credit union account Sarah had never touched. A new set of logins created in person on my terms. Professionals I could call directly. No advocate, no gatekeeper, just me, asking questions and receiving answers. The house felt different too. Not empty, but peaceful in a way it hadn't been since Richard's death. I could sit in his chair without worrying that someone was taking notes on my grief, turning my sadness into proof that I needed supervision. That spring, I started a garden. Tomatoes, basil, marigolds, things that didn't ask permission to grow. The first time I pressed my fingers into the soil, I realized how long it had been since I'd done something simply because I wanted to. David visited regularly. Our relationship repaired itself slowly, honestly. He learned to ask me directly instead of accepting someone else's interpretation of my needs. "How are you really doing, Mom?" he asked one afternoon. "I'm doing well," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to perform strength. I just had it. The criminal case moved forward in the background, through channels I didn't have to manage day to day. What mattered most wasn't the noise of it. It was the quiet fact that my life belonged to me again. I chose my own bank, my own lawyer. 6 months after the protective order, and a full year after Richard died, I finally understood that grief could be weaponized. The court accepted a plea, sentenced Sarah, and ordered restitution. But the real victory was never her punishment. It was getting my voice back. I learned that trusting my instincts didn't make me paranoid. When someone insisted I was too confused to handle my own affairs while quietly taking control of those affairs, that wasn't care. It was strategy. The most important lesson was simple. Keep the receipts. Document dates, screenshots, case numbers, and every helpful change someone makes on your behalf. The truth always left a trail. I still missed Richard, but I no longer felt helpless. Vulnerability didn't equal incompetence, and needing support didn't mean surrendering control. If someone's using your vulnerability to question your clarity, trust your instincts. If this story resonated with you, share your experience below. And if you want more stories like this, please like and subscribe. Trust your instincts and keep the receipts.